It was the decade of the 1930s. The world was undergoing a massive economic crisis in form of the Great Depression, which had slowly spread all around the world, resulting from the stock market crash in the USA. Countries attempted to shore up their threatened economies by fortifying themselves and sharply raised their barriers by drastic devaluation of their currencies and curtailment of the financial freedom of their citizens. But these attempts proved to be self-defeating, as they led to a huge decline in world trade and disruption of international monetary cooperation. Employment and living standards dropped immensely in many countries around the world, creating a desperate scenario. Following this breakdown, the IMF was founded with an aim to prevent further Great Depressions as also wars by overseeing the international monetary system and encouraging global trade. The multinational NGO of IMF came formally into existence in December of 1945, based on the American plan created by Harry Dexter White, one of the two founding fathers of the organization. White worked with co-founder John Maynard Keynes, whose British Treasury plan for the IMF had initially competed with White's American plan. The American Party foresaw IMF to be like a bank, making sure that borrowing states could repay their debts on time. And this plan was finally chosen as 29 founding member countries signed its Articles of Agreement. The IMF opened its first headquarters in Washington, D.C. in 1946, where it continues to exist as of date. Its mission today focuses on working to foster global monetary cooperation, secure financial stability, facilitate international trade, promote high employment and sustainable economic growth, as well as to reduce poverty around the world. As is evident from its mission statement, IMF is expected to play a meaningful role towards tackling various problems. Its present programs include surveillance, lending, technical assistance, and research. The features of these programs include availability of assistance to member countries only, an objective to help member countries to strengthen their economic capacity, and a set of conditions accompanying the loans.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show. I'm Faheem, your host for tonight. Today we'll be talking about IMF, the International Monetary Fund. We'll get to know more about it from our guests who will be answering some of our questions, which were sent to us by our viewers last week. So before I get started, I would like to introduce my guests today. Okay, and now I'll introduce all the honorable guests we have today with us, starting by Professor Bahodur from Michigan. And then we have Dr. Nadia from India. And finally, we have Dr. Sarifin from International Islamic University of Malaysia. Assalamu alaikum, doctor. How are you? Okay, everyone? How's everything? Good? And now I'd like to ask a question to Dr. Nadia. Dr. Nadia, can you just tell us about the understanding, like, as in what IMF has actually done to other nations since the beginning, since its inception? What do you think it has done? Can you just tell us about it?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Faheem. Okay, for your information, IMF was established unofficial in 1944 at Bretton Woods Conference with the participation of 45 countries. At that time, the many countries at that time was unsecure, where the world trade declined sharply. Okay, but 1 year later, which is in 1945, the organization was established officially, with the first 29 members signed the Articles of Agreement. And for your information, France became the first country to borrow the money from IMF.
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me here tonight. Okay, work of IMF is three main tapes. They involve to monitoring economics and financial development and providing policy advice and especially to crisis prevention. And the IMF also lend the two countries with a balance of payment, difficulty to provide temporary financing and support to low-income countries, and also aimed especially to poverty reduction. The third, the IMF also provides the country with the technical assistance and training in area of expertise. Supporting to the three of these activities is IMF work economic research and statistics. In recent years, as a part of this effort, the strength in international financial system in the enhance to the effectiveness of providing and resolving crisis. The IMF also applied both cause of good parties in area responsibility and strengthening of financial sector. IMF also plays an important role in the fight against money laundering and terrorism. Thank you very much for asking me this question.
And now, in order to look at the IMF under Islamic perspective, we have Dr. Sarifin from UIA, which is International Islamic University of Malaysia. And he's going to tell us the IMF's impact on the Muslim nations. So Dr. Sarifin, can you please tell us?
Okay, thank you. First thing I have to mention is that the idea of IMF is not identified as a legal thing by some Muslim scholars. Some of them say that IMF is permissible, some of them they say that the funds from IMF is haram because it involves interest. Let's say from the Egypt perspective, they say that 1.2% of interest is still acceptable in Islam. But for me, from my opinion, 1% interest still the interest and still prohibited in Islam, as we all know in Quran and Hadith, Allah has mentioned it. Okay, the system of the deposit gone from the member states to the HQ in US also created a controversy developed on IMF in Islam, because in the agreement article, the IMF has stated that we cannot use the gold as the money, and this is contradicted with the thing is Allah has mentioned in Quran. And the effect of the IMF either good or bad to the Muslim nation. We cannot deny all the benefit that the IMF has been done to make the global economy stable and strong growth. The IMF has also held a consultation regarding the Islamic finance issues and realized that the reliance of the Islamic finance cash is much more higher than the conventional industry. However, we as a Muslim, we cannot accept the fund from the IMF because some issues contrary to the Islam. The main functions of the IMF is giving loan with the interest base. That means usury and riba in our religions. This money is not clean with Islam and may raise all the problem rather than the existing problem of the member state. That's typically a bad debt. 100% interest is still the interest. One of the reasons the IMF has negative effect to the Muslim country because of the story behind the IMF is a system of borrowing money and rich America and Wall Street, as well as the companies and individuals to Israel. These things happen in reality. As a Muslim, we have to concern about this issue. So what do you think?
I think you are absolutely right. I actually agree with you to a certain extent.
Yes.
So, guests, viewers, I believe we've almost done with the show today with this segment. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Next week we'll come back with a new segment about Safta. Please stay tuned until next week. See you again. Thank you. So viewers, earlier today I interviewed two of the very prominent professors in this country, who were Professor Syazwani, who's from University of Malaya, and the other one is Associate Professor Ainul, who's the Vice Director of Bank Negara Malaysia. I interviewed them about the positive and negative impact of IMF on all the countries worldwide, and hope you will enjoy the interview right now.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you, Mr. Faheem, for that question. Yes, there are negative impact of IMF to the member states, which are: first, international investors have a tendency to engage in momentum trading and herding, which can be destabilizing for developing economies. Second, international investors may, together with domestic residents, engage in speculative attacks on developing countries' currencies, thereby causing instability that is not warranted based on their economic and policy fundamentals. Third, the risk of contagion presents a major threat to otherwise healthy countries, since international investors could withdraw capital from these countries for reasons unrelated to domestic factors. Last but not least, a government, even if it is democratically elected, may not give sufficient weight to the interests of future generations. This becomes a problem when the interests of future and current generation diverge, causing the government to incur excessive amount of debt. Moreover, financial globalization had made government to incur debt might aggravate these overborrowing problems. I hope it answers your question.
Okay, so basically I will talk about the positive impact of IMF toward international trade. First, it functions as a short-term credit institution, where short-term credit institution is the establishment that engage in expanding credit to business enterprise for relatively short periods. Second, it provides the machinery for orderly adjustment of exchange rate. Means it provides the organization, system or structure for orderly arrangement of exchange rate, and it appears to have contributed and resulted from global policy successful response to the crisis. Orderly arrangement of exchange rate also plays an important role to improve uncertain and severe exchange rate tensions. Besides that, IMF also provide the machinery for international consultant therefore any international trade or any international business getting smooth because they're getting advice and guide from the professionals. Besides that, IMF also plays as the reservoir for the currency exchange, where between the IMF countries member, which consists of 188 countries, where one borrower nation can borrow currencies from other nation. Next and lastly, IMF also act sort of lending institution, where it only grant loans for financial current transaction only, not the capital transaction. So overall, there are four main positive impact of IMF toward international trade.